that was a big moment is when, finally hit me that, wait a minute, there's a business there. There's a business model. I'm not recreating the wheel here. It's not like one or two people have built wealth in real estate. So many of us know so many, even if you're not in this industry yet, you know somebody who's probably built wealth in real estate.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 273. When my guest today sets out to accomplish something, he doesn't just do it halfway. He goes the full 110%. In 2005, while in the Army National Guard, he was deployed to Iraq, and he was awarded Soldier of the Year. When he started his own podcast called the Real Estate Syndication Show, he didn't just settle on one episode a week. He decided to make it a daily podcast. And when he started his multifamily syndication company, LifeBridge Capital, he didn't just build a portfolio of over 600 doors worth $80 million. He also decided to give 50% of his own profits to better the lives of orphans around the world and the families who adopt them. LifeBridge Capital's motto is making a difference one investor, one child at a time. And I could go on and on about Whitney Sewell and his incredible accomplishments, but I'm going to let him have that honor today. Whitney, welcome to the show.
Brian, thank you. My pleasure. That's an incredible introduction.
You certainly have an impressive arc, both in your personal life and in your real estate career. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
That sounds great. And I'll go back a little bit because I'll give you a little backstory, and please jump in and ask any questions that you want. But it started way back, and I would say even in March of 2001 to be exact, because that's when I decided to join the military. And I say March because obviously it was in September of that year when our country was attacked. And so at that time, we didn't have any thoughts of going to war, but I just knew it was the right thing to do for me and joined. And so I was 17 at the time, joined the military, had no idea that in a few years I would be spending a year of my life in Iraq, like you talked about. That was obviously a big experience in my life. I'm so thankful that I did it. I'm so thankful that I made it home safely. Not everyone in my squad made it home alive. And so I'm very grateful to be here. And just the Lord just protected me so many times and still is, no doubt about it. But it was very obvious there, during that time. But came home and tried to figure out what I was going to do as a career, and law enforcement seemed like a great segue. I love the uniform, the discipline, just the structure, and I enjoyed that a lot. And I went to say too, the military also taught me to have what I call that never give up mentality. And even going into law enforcement, it was still so important to have that mentality, and it had to show from the way I wore my uniform to the way I, pulled every car over, to the way I got out of the car, to the way I responded to every dispatch. It was so important that showed that I had that never give up mentality. And that's just transformed, many years later into our business now. But soon, at that time, we'll say around 2009, and before, I had an income problem. As most people know, police officers are very underpaid for what they have to do. But I started searching for what could supplement our income. We wanted my wife to be able to stay at home when we had children, and that was very important to us. But making $35,000 a year was going to be very difficult. And so, that pushed me to buy. I bought 2 triplexes, made tons of mistakes, and learned so much the hard way. And it was like our own university of self-managed, all those things. And but eventually sold those. I got a job as a federal agent with the U.S. DOT, and that moved us to Virginia, where we are now. But that also changed so many things in our life. But but I stayed in real estate, but up to like a 15 unit. And that was about as big as I could imagine at that time, or wrap my head around thinking that's what I could buy. I had no idea that I'd be able to buy a 100 unit complex. So I really thought that was for those guys who had been in it 20, 30, 40 years and didn't really know who that would be, or if I could ever get to that spot. However, I started going to conferences, started meeting lots of people, and discovered that many people that had only been in the business a few years were buying those buildings. And I just couldn't believe it. And so I thought, again, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. And so I jumped into the syndication business and started learning as much as I possibly could. And I'm happy to get into more of that story of when things really turned around for us. But that was a big moment, is when finally hit me that, wait a minute, there's a business there. There's a business model. I'm not recreating the wheel here. Like, I can go in there and I can do this too. It's not like one or two people have built wealth in real estate. So many of us know so many, even if you're not in this industry yet, you know somebody who's probably built wealth in real estate. And so at that point, it's like, okay, I need to focus on this syndication thing and learn that business. And so we sold everything else and completely committed to that business. But at the same time, we were going through adoption processes, and there's a big story there, and happy to get into that. But that's where our why came from, like you alluded to in the introduction. And that's been a big driver also, of helping us get to where we're at now, and just how the Lord's used us. But I want to give you a minute, Brian, to ask any questions.
Thanks for that. There's so much there to dig into, Whitney, but I want to go back and talk maybe a little bit about mindset here, because, and thank you, by the way, for your service to our country.
You're welcome.
And you were in Iraq, and you won. I don't know if you win Soldier of the Year or you're awarded Soldier of the Year, but I'm really interested in that. What was it that led to that? And what was it about being a soldier and in the military that helped shape your mindset?
Great question. And it's something that, just even in boot camp, I use illustrations from boot camp for my boys often, in our family, and just talking to other people. But it's just something that, they teach you that you can do so much more than you really think you can. Your mind, you're really so limited, right? Your mindset, you limit yourself so much before you ever even begin something, right? But they teach you, they really put you in so many situations where you have to be pushed and you have to go so much further than you ever imagined. And in that case, obviously it's on extreme lack of sleep and, whether, carrying a lot more than you ever expected, marching a lot further and all these things. And whether it's jumping off tall buildings and rappelling or whatever it may be, you're doing things just constantly that you never imagined you'd be able to do. And it's never an option to quit. That's just not an option. And so I feel like that's helped me just on a daily basis to do, it's all about these small, consistent things, right? And it's that mindset of, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. And just building that daily structure where I can have those small victories over and over and over and over again. That's led to a lot bigger things. But military, I think, helped with that. Boot camp begins that. Being able to go overseas, obviously spend a year there, you learn so much, and come back. And Soldier of the Year was something I was very proud of. I am very proud of. And of course, I was in the Guard, and it was in the Guard. So you do 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer. But that year I was full-time military, for that entire year. So and we were in combat for a year. So if I could get it any year, that would have been the year I would have wanted it. And so that was voted on, by my commander and lieutenants and sergeants and people like that are, way above me. And they look at, guys that, and how you've served and how, whether it's showing up on time, whether it's just doing what you're supposed to be doing all the time, somebody they're not having to get after or, anything, somebody they can trust is going to do what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it. And it's those things. And that's why, I was very proud of that award, at that time, because I knew those supervisors and I was just honored that they thought that much of me.
Going back to that mindset that you developed, really pushing yourself and doing things you never would have imagined. It strikes me that you didn't just buy a 3-unit as your first rental property. You bought 2 3-units. And like I said in the intro, you didn't just start a podcast, you started a daily podcast. Take us through your decision-making process when you say, okay, I'm going to do something. Do you automatically just double or triple whatever that is you set as a goal?
I don't think it's like this thing I'm thinking about that, oh, wait a minute, I'm just going to double or triple that. But I think sometimes it's like, if I can do it bigger, why not? It's not so much I really don't want to. I want to be held back, if I can get there. I want to be smart about it, of course. But even like the daily podcast, well, obviously, I know one other guy in this business who has a daily real estate podcast, or maybe a few others now, but who have had, who had massive success, and at that point, when I was starting a daily podcast anyway, it was more like, well, let's not try to reinvent the wheel here. It obviously worked very well, and I can understand why it worked. And so let's just, instead of focusing on how big of a thing this is, because it's been insane, and I try not to downplay it to anybody. It has been such an undertaking to make it happen. It has been so much work. I just can't even stress it. But instead of focusing on that, like, let's focus on the processes and to make it happen. Let's build the team, let's build the systems, and let's get it in motion. And so that's what we did. And so I built before we ever launched the first show, I had a whole team. I had 4 VAs from all over the world that were doing different parts of the podcast for me. I had 60 shows in advance before I ever launched. And so it was a lot of planning there, right? And so it wasn't just haphazardly. I didn't just, put it out there and hope it works. We did a lot of planning. I did, and built the team around that so we can move forward successfully.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you approach that, and the way you approach your putting together the podcast and putting a team in place before you even get going. And it seems like with real estate, it's very similar. I would guess it's very similar in that you're not getting in there with a hammer and really getting into the nitty gritty of the units and the rental property that you're buying, but you're creating the team that's going to take care of the whole thing. And it's 2 very different things. It's the difference between having a business and putting systems and teams in place to handle that business for you, and then just being a rental property owner, the person who's going to take care of that and do the majority of the work. Talk about that. Do you consider yourself a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a real estate investor?
I would say I'm doing all those things. I am a real estate investor. No doubt about it. An entrepreneur, all those things. But I have to be good at processes, right? I have to be good at finding key people who are the best at what they do. And that is ultimately how we've gotten where we're at so quickly. From doing those small multifamily deals and only a few to doing 100 million, in real estate last year. And just obviously just massive growth, in a very short period of time. But it is because we have key people on our team who are really good at what they do. And when we joined our forces together, we joined our skills, our unique abilities together. That allowed us to project, forward and upward in a way that we never even thought we could.
Is that something you learned in the military, how to put systems and teams in place to get things done? Or is that something you learned after the military?
I would say after the military.
Let's talk about some of your systems and teams that you have, because obviously you have the thought leadership and the podcast that you're working on. We haven't even really talked on your philanthropy and how you work with orphans and families who adopt orphans. But then you have the syndications too. Are those separate teams, or do you just have a lot of employees doing all these things for you?
They are separate teams. So, and I'll break it down a little bit for you. And again, ask any questions. So when I started, I had 4 VAs from all over the world, different parts of the world even. I had another VA that was local or in the US that would help me manage them and make sure everything was getting done, right? I had a large Google sheet, and I would put all the jobs across the top that I needed to happen to successfully complete a podcast, and have it posted and published, all those things. And then down the left would be the date of the show and the number of the show and the guest name. And, and it would just go across, right? And that my assistant here in the States would help me to manage making sure that we were going straight across there, making sure everything gets done like it's supposed to, right? And that's changed now. Now I have a lady in the Philippines who all she does full time is manage the podcast and some marketing and some of those things. And then most of the production side is hired out by another group now. And so I took away that just that management piece, off our plate. And so there's one group that does a larger portion of the editing, video, audio, all those things now. But then it's, and that's just the podcast. That's, that team. And it is, it's such a big part of our business, but it is operated pretty separately. But then inside, I have a business partner and who is just a crucial part of our team. He and I are really the key players in the business. But his, and it's a big story about how we met, but it's so important. Partnerships are so crucial in this business, making it or not making it. I've just seen it go both ways so many times. But I was asked to partner with so many people and turned them down. And early on, as hard as we were pushing, it was very tempting, right? Because you think, okay, you can make some more money here, but we said, no, it's just not what's best. And so it just didn't know these people or just didn't feel comfortable. But long story short, my business partner, Sam Rust, he and I were introduced at a conference a couple of years ago. And ultimately I could see, just right away, I could see that we just valued so many of the same things and agreed on so many of the same things, whether it's family and faith and, things that were very important to me in a partnership. But then he had also, been in real estate, been very successful in a family business, and graduated college at 17. He's not your average young guy. But his skill set was numbers and underwriting and structuring deals, and I could see that he was very talented at that. And so I'm like, okay, this is a part of my team that I need. Like, it's something that I don't enjoy as much, and I don't have the time to perfect it. And it's something that needs to be perfected, right? And so I could see that he was very good at that. And so, I approached him about partnering, and we did a big due diligence process on each of us, just so everybody knows. We took a lot of time to get to know one another, to ensure that it was that it was a good partnership, and it has been. But after we partnered and joined our skill sets, it's just really allowed us to move forward in a very fast way. I have another lady that's full-time that just helps on the admin side of investors and helping them through the capital raise process and just their entire life cycle. That is her job. I have a full-time assistant who is doing an amazing job. Sam also has a full-time assistant. We're looking to hire a full-time asset manager and marketing director probably within the next few months.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. By the way, do you still have a W-2 job, or have you shifted completely to real estate?
I do not. But most people should know, I was still working a full-time job. We're doing a daily podcast while syndicating deals, working with investors, and a full-time family, going through our third adoption process, all at the same time. And so I just say that not to brag, but to say, if I can do it, you can do it too.
Yeah. So you really took on quite a bit. If you look back in time, at what point did things really shift for you into this new lifestyle that you've created?
I would say one was when I hired a mentor. And I did a lot of due diligence on that as well, and found the mentor that I wanted to partner with. It was a paid mentorship. I tell people it doesn't have to be paid, but there's unpaid and paid mentorships that work out great. But that was a big turning point for me, and having kind of a roadmap, right, or at least something. It was still all dependent on me and making it happen, but that was very helpful, just to have somebody that I could schedule a call with, somebody I could ask questions of that had been there and done that. And that helped me to really, build the brand and build the business and put things in place, including the podcast. But then I had partnered with him on a couple very large projects, 300 to 400 unit deals, and so that helped gain a lot, helped me to gain a lot of knowledge about the business and doing a deal and those things as well. But then Sam and I met, and then and that's where it really took a whole, we added 10 more gears there. And just took off in a whole different speed.
So hiring a mentor, that was kind of where you made the decision to spend that money, but it really made a difference in your career.
That's right.
Can you say who your mentor was or what program you were with?
Sure. Joe Fairless is my mentor. Just a great guy. He's a good friend of mine now.
The other guy who has a daily podcast.
That's right. He is the other one.
Did he say, Whitney, you can only join my program if you do a daily podcast?
No, I would say he's probably encouraged most people not to do it. Because he understands firsthand just how much work it has been. But and a quick story on that, I was at 2 conferences before I launched my podcast, and I was talking to, I had dinner with 2 different people that everybody listening to this would know. Very big names in our industry. And I was telling them about the podcast, and both of them said, Whitney, you're crazy. Don't do that. Don't do a daily podcast. That's too much work. And so I went to Joe and I said, because most of the time I would have that mindset. Oh no, I'm doing it. I'm pushing forward. I don't care what they say. I'm going to do it. But considering who these 2 people were, I questioned it. Right. But I told Joe about it, and he was like, that's why you have to do it, because it's too much work. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. So, it was just some crucial things like that, like having somebody that can just reinforce what you're doing and push you forward just a little bit when you need it. It's so helpful.
And do you think it's made a difference to you, that fact that you're doing a daily podcast as opposed to a weekly podcast?
Without a doubt. We would not have done the deals we've done. We would not have done, I believe that I would not have probably met Sam, and probably would not have, done $100 million in real estate last year. And probably we wouldn't have had the investor base to have done it either, if not doing a daily podcast. It's increased my network 7 times faster than most people. So you do the math, as opposed to gaining 50. It's just a massive networking tool, right? It's a way to help so many people get started and learn about this business. But obviously it helps me to network just like you. You and I to get to know each other better because of these conversations that we get to have, you being on my show and me on yours. That's, a year's worth every day, of people as opposed to 52. So, it's just a matter of being consistent and keeping going.
You mentioned about working with adopted children, and you've adopted yourself. I know that's an important part of your why. Talk about that a little bit and how that informs your real estate investing.
No, I appreciate you asking about that. And I'll give a quick story. When my wife and I became a federal agent, we moved to Virginia. We visited a pastor, and he was talking. It's this thing called Secret Church. His name's David Platt, in case anybody wants to look it up. But it's a really cool teaching he does twice a year. And it's intended for people all over the world who don't get to hear teaching. But he was talking about caring for orphans and widows, and how he and his family had adopted. How there's 160 million orphans in the world, and it can cost $40,000 to $60,000 to bring one home. It's a very frustrating thing that it costs that much and hinders so many families. But after hearing him talk about it, my wife and I had never discussed adopting before, and never even crossed our mind. We grew up in one stoplight town. It was not something you ever heard of, where we grew up. However, on our way home, we got talking about it, and we couldn't think of a good reason why not to adopt. It was really that simple. It's like, why would we not bring a child home? And so within a week, we turned in our application to adopt from Ethiopia. And 2 years later to the month, it took that long, our first son, Samuel, came home. And then another year later, our second son, Elijah, came home through adoption. And then We had a daughter born through adoption as well, and she's a year and a half old now. And so, through those processes, especially the first two, it was very difficult financially to make that happen. We had to do tons of fundraising and just so much to do to afford it and make it happen. And now we talk to so many families who want to hear, or get just hear about how we did it. And often they say, Whitney, well, that's more than I'm making a year. How can I make this happen? Right? How can we do it? And oftentimes people won't, because they see that burden of that financial side. And so that pushed us to want to help those families commit to bringing their children home. And so we started the LifeBridge Foundation, and yes, we committed half of our personal profits. It's not the whole team, but just us personally, to that foundation. And then we have other people that are giving now as well. And that's even something that we hope to brand more, over the next 6 months or so, and promote a lot more. But that's a way that, the Lord has just blessed our business, and we want to help so many families, or as many families as we can, to bring their children home through adoption as well.
And the real estate allows you to do that, it sounds like. I mean,
that's right. That's right. And I'll share something too. So obviously that's our why, that's our mission behind LifeBridge Capital, and that helps us to keep going, right? Thinking about these families, thinking about these children. But I would say too, my family has been so supportive, my wife and my children, because as I mentioned earlier, all those things I had going on at one time, as you can imagine, there was no time for family, unfortunately. My children knew, like, Saturday afternoons or Sundays when I wasn't traveling was like family time. And outside of that, even though I was at home, I didn't get to have meals, with the family. And time was so strict. But I would say through that, say, 2-year process of just working 2 full-time jobs, my wife is not into real estate. However, she's very passionate about our why, our mission. And so that helps her to stay motivated as well. When those times get long, and, what dad or her husband, has been, even though I'm in the house, I'm in the office, or I'm traveling, those times get long, right? And you wonder, is this really going to work? And it's helpful to have that why, or that mission that you're both behind in a big way.
Let's talk about your syndications, because that is what you do with the real estate. Is you're syndicating? Is it primarily apartments? And what is your sweet spot? What do you look for, and what type of deals do you put together?
Yes. So we are focused on multifamily. That's what we've done up to this point. With the typical value add type plan, there's a problem there, right, that we can fix. And most of the time it's mismanagement of some kind. And usually they're very outdated, and we'll go in and renovate, every unit. But we're looking for properties that are at least 100, but preferably 150 to 200 units each. And we're in Colorado and Idaho as well. So, but yeah, all multifamily, and not to say too, just as much as changing right now. We're looking at other asset classes and other markets, and considering other types of deals as well. So I want us to be, to focus on where we are, our sweet spot, like you mentioned, and what we're really good at. But I don't want us to overlook opportunity or be willing to change, as things change.
It's interesting. You're in Colorado and Idaho, which, I don't know too many people who are invested in those states. Idaho is just screaming hot right now. Did you get in early because you saw something going on there, or like, how did you know to go into Idaho?
So we had some connections there. Sam had some connections in Idaho before he and I had ever met. But then after we met, it was obvious to me after he and I had talked, I learned more about the Colorado Springs market, to be specific, in Boise, Idaho. And it was just, it was a no-brainer that we should move into those markets and we should focus there. He's local there. He lives in Denver. So it's, we loved having somebody that can be there on the ground and be there for the management meetings. And I'm there probably once a quarter, if not more often. But he can be there much more often. And so that was a big decision maker. However, both of those markets have just been have had steady growth, especially Colorado Springs, but both of them for over 100 years. Just very steady. It's not your Dallas, but it's and actually maybe soon, it may be the way it's going over the last few months. But Boise specifically is exploding. It's just insane, some of the things we've seen there. But at that time, we could see there was great growth in overall a very long period of time, and extremely high demand, even before, say the last 6 or 8 months or a year, from what's happened recently. But it's just increased so much more over the last year.
How long have you been in Idaho, and what are you seeing on the ground there that makes it such a compelling place where people are looking? And I know there's not much inventory, so you probably have 20% of it by now.
No, we actually just have one property there. Most of our properties are in Colorado. We have 172 unit property there. We're looking, obviously like so many are now, but in Boise. But it's and to give you some, I guess to help you think through a little bit of what's happening there. I mean, people obviously moving from the West Coast, from California, and they are coming to Colorado Springs, they're coming to Boise and many, many other markets, in the West and even coming further east. But in that market specifically, I mean, there's a developer there. He actually developed the property that we purchased. But I mean, he had somebody come in and offer him $225,000 per door for everything he has, everything. In August, we purchased we have a Class A property there. It's our only Class A property. We were around $170,000 a door. So you do the math. I mean, that's since August. Okay. That's just since August. And so it is just going crazy. I'm glad we got in when we did, but we're going to be careful about obviously moving forward what you purchase and don't want to overpay.
Tell us about Colorado. I mean, that's one of your markets. Colorado Springs, I know, has always been a great area. Why is it a great area to invest?
I love thinking about track record, right? And saying, okay, over so many years, it has had a track record of growth. It's just very steady growth for a very long period of time. Not to mention, obviously there's an airport there that is growing as well. But then Amazon just built the largest facility there next to that airport, which is within a mile between 1 to 5 miles within most of our properties. But that warehouse is larger. It's the largest warehouse within 7 surrounding states as well. But not to mention like USAA and other very large corporations and businesses that are stationed there. The Army base as well. That's right there. And so it's just it's a place where people love to come. It's a place where, especially now that they can telework, they can love the outdoors. They can do all the things in the outdoors while working still at the same job that they had while living in California. And
are you finding deals right now? I mean, how has it been in this pandemic to find deals to even go after?
We closed the deal in March, and a week later they shut the country down. So I'm so thankful we got it closed when we did. But at that point we thought, we may not get to do another deal this year. Like nobody knew what to expect. Right. And however, we closed the deal in August and we closed 2 in December. And so we're very thankful for that deal flow, that we were able to find those, but it is difficult. And I think it's even gotten worse, over the last month and a half. It just seems to me, or 2 months, that it's just like less and less deal flow, or, the prices are just going up so much more. It's like, okay, it's just not worth that, or depending on what you're looking at. But no, it's been very difficult. All of our deals have been through broker relationships. Those relationships have been key for us. There's been no direct to seller, or we had one through a management company, that had a connection, but still, still through a relationship like that.
Whitney, as we wrap it up here, I'm wondering if you have any advice for our listeners. I mean, obviously you're very driven. You take on goals and you multiply them, triple them, and achieve them. And that's what it takes to be successful with what you do. What advice do you have for our listeners who might want to follow in your footsteps? I would say obviously you have to have some drive, right? And I would say it does start with mindset. And Brian, you've gone over that so well. It is so important. For me, I remember when I started reading The Miracle Morning, and I wouldn't say I follow everything in that book or believe in everything that he says in that book. However, it did help me to think through the structure of my morning and to think through like, what am I doing with that time? What's happening, right? With that time. And at that point, like I remember starting to read that book, where we're at, where I was living, what chair I was even sitting in, and thinking through that. And that helped me to make the decision. And again, it's a decision. And it's, we didn't get to where we're at because I'm some genius, because I am not. I am willing to work as hard as anybody, I think, or as hard as I possibly can and make it happen. But I was willing to make that decision
to make it happen and say, okay, I can do this. I can move forward. I can put these things in place. And it is those small, consistent things that you do that make the big difference. It's not going to be this one day you win the lottery type scenario. It is, what can I start doing today and get started? And you think, oh, it's going to take me this long to read that book or that. Well, yeah, but it's going to take a lot longer if you don't get started, right? If you don't start today. So get started, and find a mentor. I encourage you to have people that can help motivate you, help, drive you, that you can ask questions of. It does not have to be a paid mentorship, but you need people who have been there and done that, who are ahead of you. And I know everybody hears that on podcasts, but have you done it? And I say, reach out to people like myself and like Brian. I put my contact information out all the time, and it's very seldom that anybody reaches out, right? I'm like, what are you afraid of? I did. So way back when I was going to local meetups, I had not started anything in syndication yet, and I heard a guy on a podcast put his name and stuff out, his email, and I called him. And you know what? He said I couldn't talk right now, but he called me back later. And he's been a good friend now. He's a really big name in this industry. And so we've talked so many times now and have done different things together, not a deal, but different things. And it's been neat to see where that relationship has gone as well. So I encourage you. Most people in this business are willing to help. So reach out and ask for guidance, ask for help.
Yeah, that's one of the things about this business that I'm very impressed with is people are willing to share information and their stories and experience. And we both know that because we host podcasts where we get people to do that. And they're very friendly and eager to help people who have questions and just need some advice or some assistance. So you're absolutely right there. Whitney, how would people get a hold of you or find out more about you?
You can email me, Whitney at lifebridgecapital.com. You can call or text 540-585-4338.
Whitney, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed learning more about you and your military history, your work with adoption and how important that is to you and how that's your why. Learning about your arc and how you started with two, three units and just worked your way up to over 600 doors now? We
are 899 now.
Well, it was 600 when I wrote this introduction a couple months ago. So you're killing it. So congratulations on that. Thanks so much for sharing all this with us. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.